I still remember the smell of chocolate cake that morning, something my mom had never done before, not even on Thanksgiving or Christmas. She wasn't much of a cook, and if she ever walked into the kitchen, it was usually just to grab scissors to clip coupons off milk cartons. But that day, she baked. I should have known something was wrong. I had just turned 18, still wearing my old gray pajamas, hair tossed into a messy bun when my dad called me into the living room. He was sitting there, back pressed into his leather chair, eyes fixed on the floor. Mom sat beside him, hands clenched on her knees, avoiding my gaze. No one smiled. No happy birthday. Just silence. Long, heavy, and suffocating. "Sit down," Dad said, his voice low and cold, like the time I broke the dining room lamp in 6th grade. I did as he said, hands clutching the hem of my shirt. I could feel it. Everything I knew was about to change. Mom spoke first, every word stiff like she'd memorized them. "You were adopted." I froze. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. My ears went quiet. "We brought you home when you were almost 3, Dad added. "Your birth mother couldn't care for you. We did what we could." I swallowed hard, eyes locked on a loose thread in the carpet. No hugs. No tears. They spoke like they were announcing a change in bank policy. "It's time for you to go your own way," Mom said. Her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't warm either. Then Dad reached under his chair and pulled out a small canvas bag. He pushed it toward me. It thudded against the floor, heavier than it looked. "Some cash, a few clothes. We booked you a temporary room at a motel." They were kicking me out. On my 18th birthday, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up slowly, looked at them with the calm expression I'd mastered after years in a house that valued silence over emotion. "Thank you," I said. Soft, clear, then picked up the bag. They didn't notice how tightly my fingers clenched the strap. They had no idea I already knew. Because 3 weeks earlier, I found something they never expected. That night, while digging for old records to fill out a scholarship form, I opened the hallway cabinet upstairs, the one where they stored tax returns and banking papers. At the very bottom, under a stack of dull folders, was an old yellow envelope, unsealed, in scrawled handwriting. "For L. Wexler." I didn't know who that was, but what was inside stopped my heart. A copy of my birth certificate. My name was still there, Katie Monroe? But under Mother was a name I'd never seen, Madison Wexler. The father line was blank. I sat on the cold floor, heart pounding. Madison Wexler? Who was she? For the next 3 weeks, I searched. I didn't ask anyone in the house. It was just me and the internet. I read everything I could about Madison Wexler, and then I found the old articles. Really old, but still archived in the city library. The news said Madison was a psychology researcher at a neurotherapy center in the northern suburbs. There had been a major scandal. She accused the center's director of misconduct during experimental treatments on women. Not long after, she was detained for unstable behavior and sent to a psychiatric facility called Maplewood Hills. The records stopped there. No new photos, no updates. No one mentioned her after 2004. The more I read, the colder I felt. I didn't know if she was still alive. I'd never heard her name mentioned in our home. But the question that kept me up for nights was one no one could answer. Why was I, daughter of a whistleblower, adopted by 2 people financially tied to the very center she exposed? My 18th birthday wasn't the day I lost a family. It was the day I realized I'd been living in a carefully crafted lie. I left the house I'd lived in for 15 years without looking back. The suburban home with the white porch and shuttered windows was nothing more than a stage set for a play I never agreed to be in. The motel they booked for me sat next to a highway, reeking of bleach, damp carpet, and stale air. I couldn't sleep that night. My canvas bag sat by the bed, holding 2 outfits, some loose change, and the yellow envelope I'd hidden for weeks. The only thing of real value I had. Early the next morning, I went to the city library, the only place I felt safe. I sat at the public computers, my hands still trembling, and typed, Madison Vexler. This time, I dug deeper, not news articles or public records, but digital archives, leaked documents, and posts on investigative journalism forums. And then, a new name kept appearing next to my birth mother's. Dr. Colin Harrow. He was the former medical director of a private treatment center called the Harrow Institute for Integrated Mental Health. According to documents from 20-032-004, Madison was the lead specialist until she filed an internal report on unethical practices, including unapproved drug trials and deep behavioral interventions on female patients with no guardians. 1 week after her report, she was suspended, a month later institutionalized at Maplewood Hills for long-term observation. Her records vanished. Her name never appeared again. I printed everything, stuffed it into my coat pocket. On the way back, I remembered the letters Greg Monroe used to get, envelopes from something called the Vail Foundation. I thought it was charity. But that same name appeared in a footnote of one of the articles I'd just printed. The Vail Foundation, a private fund that supported the Harrow Institute from 2000 to its closure in 2005. My blood ran cold. Was Greg just a regular adoptive dad? Or a cog in this entire system? I pulled up public donation records. A 2011 donor report listed Gregory Monroe as a distinguished benefactor to the Vail Foundation, with a note, special contribution to post-recovery support programs. My chest tightened. He never talked about therapy, never visited hospitals, but he donated to a foundation tied to the place where my mother was locked away. No doubt remained. They knew. Greg and his wife, the woman who once held my hand when I was sick, who helped me pick a prom dress, they knew everything, and they stayed silent. That night, I didn't return to the motel. I found an all-night coffee shop, took a booth in the farthest corner, and opened my old notebook. I wrote it all down, names, dates, addresses, connections. A map formed out of invisible strings. And at the center of it all was Madison Vexler, the woman who lost everything to speak the truth, then was buried by a diagnosis. I didn't know if she was alive. I didn't know if Maplewood Hills still existed, or had been renamed, dissolved, or erased like so many truths. But I knew I had to find out. I started calling medical records offices, notary centers, and mental health facilities around the Harrow area. Most said no. Some said they had no records. But one older woman at the state archives paused when I asked about Madison Vexler. "You're not the first to ask about her," she said. Then hung up. That answer chilled me more than anything. Who was the first? Did they find Madison? Or did they disappear? I didn't know what I was stepping into, but this wasn't just about my identity anymore. This was about a mother silenced, and the truth I was determined to uncover. It took me nearly 2 weeks to track down Maplewood Hills. It had closed in 2010. No website, no public files. On most maps, it was just a gray, unnamed patch. But an old post from a forum on psychiatric care anomalies gave me a new name. Clearhaven Recovery Center, said to have taken in special transfers after Maplewood shut down. I called Clearhaven from a payphone, using a fake name I'd prepared. The receptionist said they couldn't share patient info, but hesitated when I asked about Madison Vexler. She told me to hold, then transferred the call to another woman, calm but cautious. "What is your relationship to Miss Vexler?" she asked. Without pause, I said, "I'm her daughter." Silence. 10 seconds. Then, "You can visit, but only during restricted hours, and you'll have to sign a no-recording agreement." I agreed immediately. The next morning, I took the 6:15 bus to the northern suburbs. Clearhaven sat in a misty hillside, isolated like it had been deliberately forgotten. The main building was old stone, overgrown with dry ivy, the entrance shaded by tall pines. The air smelled of damp wood and antiseptic, sharp and cold. The front desk gave me a short form to sign, then called upstairs. Room 14, second floor, 15 minutes only. My heart pounded as I reached the white-painted wooden door. I gripped the handle, inhaled deeply, and gently pushed it open. She was sitting there, a thin woman with snow-white hair framing a gaunt face. She faced the window, where sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting shadows on a stack of faded books. The room was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat echo. I whispered, "Miss Madison?" She turned slowly. Her eyes met mine, dark brown, deep and sad, but still holding something. Recognition? Hope? I wasn't sure, but she didn't look away. I stepped forward and sat down across from her. "My name is Katie," I said, voice trembling. "You had a daughter, 18 years ago." Tears welled up in her eyes, but none fell. She blinked, then nodded slowly. "I remember," she said, barely audible but clear. "I never forgot." I pulled out the birth certificate copy and printed articles, placing them on the table. "I found everything. I know you didn't leave me. They took me." She exhaled, as if something heavy had been lifted after nearly 2 decades. "They said I was paranoid, that I imagined things, but I knew. I knew too much." I waited. Then she continued, steadier this time. "They tested drugs on patients no one knew. No guardians, no consent forms. I gathered proof, sent it to the board. A week later, I was suspended. A month later, confined." I swallowed. "Greg Monroe," I said, "the man who adopted me. Was he involved?" She trembled. "Not from cold, but from that name. He coordinated funding from the Vail Foundation, one of Harrow's protectors. When I was taken, your file was sealed. I tried to stop it. I signed letters of objection, but then they said I was no longer legally competent." I realized my fists were clenched. One question burned at the edge of my throat. "So, did he adopt me just to cover it all up?" Madison nodded, slowly, never breaking eye contact. "You are living proof of a buried abuse case. They thought keeping you close would silence me forever." I don't know when I started crying. Madison reached out, hesitant, unsure. I took her hand, thin, cold, but warmer than any embrace I'd ever known. "Before I left," she whispered, still gazing out the window, "Be careful. They still watch. It's been years, but people like Greg don't let go." As I stood up, a nurse knocked. "Time's up." I turned back one last time. "I'll come back, and I'll get you out of here." She didn't reply, just nodded, lips moving in a faint whisper I had to lean in to hear. Never trust anyone in a white coat. I left Clearhaven just as the rain began to fall. Not a downpour, but cold enough to remind me that time wasn't on my side. With every step away from that facility, I felt like I had opened a door that could never be closed again. Madison, my birth mother, wasn't crazy. She was a victim. And if I did nothing, I'd be next in line to be silenced. A few days later, I returned to the old library, my first stop on this journey. I sat in the same corner, reopened all the files I'd gathered, this time with eyes no longer searching for roots, but preparing for a real confrontation. In the pile of faded printouts, one name appeared again and again. Judith Campbell, a former nurse who worked at Maplewood Hills from 1998 to 2010. In an anonymous post on a psychiatric care forum, someone mentioned she was the last one still willing to remember. It took me 3 days to trace disconnected phone numbers and abandoned email addresses before I found an old mailbox address in Michigan. I took a chance and sent a handwritten letter. Short, sincere, along with a copy of my birth certificate and the article about the Harrow Institute. I didn't expect a reply. But exactly 1 week later, I got an email from an anonymous address. I know who your mother is. Meet me Saturday, back entrance of Larkspur Cafe, 10 a.m. Come alone. I took the earliest bus to Michigan, carrying all my files and my notebook. The Larkspur Cafe was small and quiet, tucked beside a weekend flea market. The back alley had a row of old wooden benches and a metal door leading to the basement. She was already waiting. Gray hair, wool coat, a sharp face with eyes strangely alert. "You're Madison's daughter," she said right away, no hesitation. She was my colleague, the only one in that whole system brave enough to speak the truth. I was emotional, but I didn't waste time. I need proof. Not to tell a sad story, to expose them. Judith looked at me, then opened her bag. She pulled out an old flash drive, faded label. GHT_pilot_1. "This is a copy of treatment records I stole before I left the facility," she said. "It includes med logs, patient codes, and a video Madison once kept as evidence." I took it, hands shaking with a mix of hope and fear. "Is it enough?" I asked. "Not yet," she said, "but it's something they can't deny." Back in the city, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who understood law, media, and how to survive telling the truth. One name came to mind: Marla Reyes, a former investigative journalist fired from a major network for chasing a case tied to shady medical funds. I found her personal blog, updated only every few months but packed with forgotten scandals. I emailed her with the subject line, "I have video, internal documents, and the names of those holding my mother hostage." Less than an hour later, she called. "You joking?" Marla's voice was deep and dry. "A story like this cost me my career, but it could win your name back." There was a pause, then she said, "Meet me at the old studio, 3rd floor, 7 p.m. tomorrow. Bring everything. And don't bring anyone." The next night, I stepped into a dusty room that used to be a newsroom, now Marla's archive and safe house for truths no one else dared publish. She booted up a computer. I handed her the drive. When the video played, blurry footage of a woman restrained in a dim room, a doctor's cold voice asking about post-injection emotions, and Madison's shaky but clear response. Marla's expression changed. "We've got something real," she said, "but we have to do this right. Otherwise, people will disappear. For good." I looked her in the eye, steady. If my mom had the courage to stand alone, I can stand in the storm. "We'll expose everything, every name, every crime." Marla nodded. And so the battle began, not with bullets, with light. The light of truth, aimed straight at places they thought no one would ever touch. We didn't leak anything right away. Marla was clear. If you want to bring down a system, you don't swing once and run. You hit from all sides, all at once, before they can clean up the mess. Over the next 3 weeks, we worked like time was burning. Marla contacted 3 former attorneys who'd investigated medical ethics violations. I sent copies of the video and files to a whistle platform she trusted. Judith the nurse agreed to write an official statement, attaching an old voice recording of Madison from a therapy session. By April 12th, everything went live. The video leaked online, a long-form article hit the homepage of an independent investigative news site, a podcast aired on unauthorized medical testing on vulnerable women, and the names, Greg Monroe and Colin Harrow, were listed as board members of the Vail Foundation. Social media exploded. What began as a quiet story turned into a movement. People whose loved ones had been held at Maplewood or Clearhaven came forward. A woman in Portland posted video of her mother being forced to take trial drugs, while a leaked document revealed Vail funded a program called Female Behavioral Reconditioning, a phrase that sent chills down spines. 3 days later, the state attorney general opened a formal investigation. Federal authorities stepped in. Police raided the Vail Foundation offices and Clearhaven. Greg Monroe and Colin Harrow were invited to cooperate, though their lawyers told the press all accusations are baseless. Me? I had one goal left: get my mother out before it was too late. We arrived at Clearhaven on a gray morning. Marla drove. Judith came with us. I brought proof that Madison wasn't just a patient. She was a victim. And that she had a legal next of kin? Me. The intake staff hesitated, but when Marla handed over a copy of the subpoena from the prosecutor's office, they couldn't refuse. Within the hour, my mother was brought out, still with silver hair, but eyes no longer filled with fear. I held her hand tight. "Let's go home, Mom." Madison didn't ask where or why now. She just smiled. The kind of smile that waits 19 years for a single moment. We didn't go straight back to the city. Judith arranged for her to stay temporarily at a support center for former healthcare whistleblowers. There were therapists, legal help, but most of all, respect. At the first court hearing, I sat in the back row. Greg Monroe walked in, no longer the quiet father who once forced me to eat vegetables. He looked straight at me, and his eyes weren't guilty. They were afraid. The prosecutor opened with the first piece of evidence, the video of Madison being interrogated in a locked room, her face confused and trembling. The courtroom went silent. Then came the unapproved medication logs, internal reports signed by Monroe and Harrow. Each piece stripped away another layer of their mask. When the prosecutor said my name, Katie Monroe, as a child illegally adopted during an internal whistleblower cover-up, someone gasped. I heard a pen drop. Marla gently squeezed my shoulder. "You did what they thought was impossible. You shattered the silence they built everything on." I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I hadn't let myself rest. Weeks later, an anonymous account sent me one email. "You're not the first, but you're the first to survive." Attached was one name, Rebecca Harlow, a former journalism student who investigated Maplewood and vanished in 2012. I'd thought Claire Rothman was the only one to ever touch this secret, but it seems there were others. More truths still buried. I sent a reply asking to meet, and just one day later, I received a photo of a woman now living in Nebraska under an alias. Short hair, glasses, cautious eyes, but unmistakable. Rebecca is alive. 1 month after the first hearing, I sat with Madison at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. She had started drinking coffee again, black, no sugar, no cream. And for the first time, I saw her smile. Soft, unguarded. Her face still showed signs of wear, but her eyes were different. Bright, steady, alive. "You know," she said, gently turning her ceramic cup. "Back then, I thought no one would believe me. No one. Everything they did was designed to make women like me look unstable." I nodded, my throat tight. During those years, my mother didn't just lose her voice. They stripped away her identity. They called her a complex case. But the only thing she was guilty of was speaking up. We didn't talk much about Greg Monroe anymore. After being formally charged with 3 counts, abuse of power, falsifying records, and unlawful interference in the adoption process, he vanished from the news. His lawyer kept denying everything, but the evidence from Judith's saved emails and the audio of him saying, "Keep the child to shut her up," was undeniable. Colin Harrow didn't fare any better. His license was revoked, and the federal investigation expanded to include every facility he'd overseen. People who had stayed silent started to speak. Some were former patients, some were family members. A few were ex-colleagues who had once been too scared to question anything. Now they found each other, in forums, support groups, and more importantly, in the public release of documents. Marlo, who'd helped me every step of the way, was invited back to national television to talk about the case. She declined. "I didn't do this for the spotlight. I did it so girls like you don't have to walk through the dark alone." She agreed only to record an exclusive podcast where the story was told by me, by Judith, by Madison, and finally, by someone I never thought I'd find again, Rebecca Harlow. She reached out after hearing her name mentioned at the hearing. In her first email, Rebecca wrote only one line. "I didn't get to finish back then, but I never gave up. We met at a community center in Denver. She was living under a new identity but still had all the documents she'd gathered back in 2012. Records, handwritten letters, copies of Madison's medical reports sent to a human rights group. She'd been threatened, her laptop stolen, her bank account frozen, but she survived. And now, she chose to step into the light with us. We founded a group called the Silence Breakers, a nonprofit supporting victims who were unlawfully institutionalized, labeled unstable just for speaking the truth. We offered legal resources, mental health support, and, most importantly, a place where they could be heard. The media called us a quiet revolution in mental health care. But to me, it was simply one step toward justice for my mother, and for hundreds of others like her. I still keep the original birth certificate in my coat pocket, not to remind myself who I am, but to never forget where I came from. I was once blindfolded, treated like property, lied to, but I walked away from all of it, not just to survive, but to act. Someone once asked if I regretted stirring it all up, for confronting the people who raised me, who once called me daughter. I answered, I didn't stir anything up. I just uncovered the truth they tried to bury. And my mother, now living in a small apartment near the coast, spends her mornings watering flowers, reading books, and sometimes writing letters to former Clearhaven patients we're still helping reintegrate into society. One day, she left me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a handwritten line. You are the only reason I didn't give up. I didn't respond. I just folded it back, tucked it into my wallet next to the photo of us taken the day she walked out of Clearhaven. We didn't say anything that day. We just held hands and stepped through the gates. For the first time, unlocked. That silence, at last, was freedom. My story isn't just about finding my birth mother. It's about reclaiming the truth and finding myself. From a girl pushed out of her home with nothing but a small bag and a blurry past, I rose to expose a system built on manipulation and psychological abuse that lasted for decades. I'm no longer Katie Monroe, the child they tried to hide, but the voice that chose to rise, to defend those once forced into silence. And that, to me, is true freedom. What do you think about Katie's journey and the truth she uncovered? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, emotional, and inspiring family stories to come. I stood in the corner of the cramped living room, my soda growing lukewarm in my hand as the crowd around me danced to the lively music. At 29, my life had nothing remarkable, except that the accounting firm I worked for had just switched from desktops to new laptops. I am Sophie, an ordinary accountant with a monotonous life, every day repeating in a cycle of boredom. But that day, at Emily's birthday party, I had no idea everything was about to change. The dim lights and echoing music made me withdraw even more, trying to blend into the wall behind me. I didn't like crowded and noisy places, but Emily was a close colleague, and she insisted I come. When I was contemplating leaving early, he appeared. David was taller than everyone in the room, with neat dark hair and a smile that brightened the entire space. He walked over to me, his gaze full of confidence but without a hint of arrogance. Hi, you're Sophie, right? His voice was clear even as the music pounded in my ears. Yes, and you are? I tried not to show my unease, gripping my drink tightly. David, he replied, his smile never fading. I saw you standing here alone. Mind if I join you? He didn't wait for an answer, already standing next to me, as if his presence was the most natural thing in the world. Not at all, I said, my voice nearly swallowed by the booming bass. So, what brings you here? He leaned in just enough to be heard without making me feel crowded. I'm here for Emily's birthday. We work at the same company, I replied, trying to project a confidence I didn't really feel. You're an accountant, right? Emily mentioned it. He nodded as if he already knew the answer. That's right, just numbers and spreadsheets, I joked, even though I didn't find my job interesting at all. Sounds thrilling? He raised an eyebrow, and I couldn't tell if he was teasing or genuinely interested. Oh, absolutely. The accounting world is all wild parties and high-stakes decisions. I laughed, and this time, it wasn't forced. David chuckled, and the tension inside me slowly melted away. For the first time, I felt talking to someone was this easy. "Want to step outside for some fresh air?" he asked, tilting his head toward the back door leading to the small garden. I nodded, grateful for the chance to escape the noisy crowd. Outside, the cool air was a relief. The twinkling lights from the garden lanterns created a peaceful scene. "What about you? Why are you here?" I asked, trying to hide my nervousness. "Just like you. Looking for a good time and maybe to meet someone interesting?" he said, his smile making his eyes sparkle with warmth. We started talking about everything, from favorite movies to books we had read. I learned that he was a graphic designer, but currently stuck in a dull office job. Time seemed to stop, and before I realized it, he had taken out his phone, the screen glowing in the dark. "Can I get your number? I'd really like to see you again, Sophie." I hesitated for a moment, not used to someone being this direct. But there was something about him that made me feel safe. "Sure," I said, quickly typing my number into his phone. When I handed it back, he smiled, a smile so bright it made me want to believe in good things. "I'll call you. We should go out, just the two of us. What do you think?" "I think? That sounds nice." I smiled, my heart pounding in my chest, a feeling both strange and sweet. When he left, I stood alone in the small garden, wondering if this was a dream. My life seemed to have turned a new page, and although I didn't know what the future held, I felt ready to move forward. In the days following Emily's birthday party, I lived in a state of both anticipation and excitement. My phone was always on the loudest setting, and every time a message or call came in, my heart skipped a beat. And then, one Thursday afternoon, while I was halfway through a spreadsheet in the office, my phone vibrated. It was David. "Hey, Sophie, are you free tonight? I know a cute little coffee shop and would love to grab a drink with you." I looked at the message, a smile spreading across my face. "Sure, what time should I be ready?" I replied, my fingers gliding over the screen. Our first date took place at a coffee shop nestled on a tree-linked street. The space was warm with soft yellow lights, the aroma of fresh coffee and gentle acoustic music. David chose a table by the window, where the sunset cast a warm glow over his face. We talked endlessly, from small stories about daily work to hidden dreams. David shared his dream of becoming a freelance artist, about the paintings he created but never had the courage to display. I sat and listened, feeling the sincerity in every word he said, realizing this was the first time someone had shared so much with me. In the days that followed, my life suddenly became more vibrant. David often stopped by my office to pick me up after work, sometimes just to take a walk along the nearby park. On Saturday afternoons, he would take me to little-known corners of the city, an old bookstore, a bakery filled with the aroma of fresh pastries, or a street lined with blooming bougainvillea throughout spring. Everything suddenly felt new, even in the simplest of things. One day, David invited me over for dinner. "My parents really want to meet you," he said, his eyes filled with anticipation. Although I felt a bit hesitant, I agreed. David's family home was in the suburbs, small and cozy. Camille, his mother, opened the door and greeted me with a tight hug. "Oh, Sophie, we've finally met you," she said, her gentle eyes making me feel much more at ease. Brian, David's father, sat in the living room, nodding to me with a kind smile. That dinner was so warm. Camille cooked roasted chicken with vegetables, a simple family meal but with an extraordinary sense of closeness. They asked me about my work, my family, and shared funny stories about David's childhood. I felt like I had been a part of their family for a long time. Time passed. Winter gave way to spring. David and I became inseparable. Our dates grew longer, our conversations deeper, and I opened my heart more than ever before. One late afternoon, David called me outside. He said he wanted to take me to a special place. His car slowly made its way to the riverbank, where the water reflected the city lights like thousands of stars. A gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of cool water. We walked hand in hand along the stone path. Then David stopped under a small bridge, where the lights created vibrant golden streaks. He turned to me, held my hand tightly, his eyes serious yet filled with tenderness. "Sophie," he said, his voice warm and deep. "I know this might be too soon, but I don't want to wait any longer. Will you marry me?" The question rang out, clear and precise, making my heart skip a beat. The world seemed to fall silent, with only the sound of the wind and the water gently flowing beneath the bridge. "I do," I whispered, my voice soft but filled with a sea of emotions. David smiled, a smile that melted all my worries away. He gently slipped a simple yet elegant silver ring onto my finger. The ring was not too flashy, but perfect for me, just like how he always approached everything with such thoughtfulness and depth. We got married in the summer, in the small garden behind David's parents' house. It was a simple ceremony, only with family and a few close friends. I wore a soft white dress, nothing too fancy. But when I stood in front of the mirror, I truly felt beautiful. Camille helped me adjust my hair, her eyes shining with pride. David waited for me under a floral arch decorated with white roses and green leaves. When I walked towards him, he looked at me as if I were the most wonderful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was gentle, and when we exchanged vows, I knew I had found my place. After the wedding, we moved into my small apartment. Life was fresh and sweet. But after a few months, David proposed an idea that made me think. "Hey," he began one evening as we sat on the old sofa watching a movie. "My parents are getting older, and I want us to move in with them for a while. It would help them and save us money, so we could buy our own house in the future." I stayed silent for a moment. Living with my in-laws had always been something I hesitated about, but I understood David's good intentions. His family had always treated me well, and if this could help them, I was willing to try. "All right, but we need to make sure we have our own space and set clear boundaries from the start," I replied, holding his hand. David smiled, kissing my forehead. "I know. Thank you for agreeing. I promise to do everything to make sure you always feel comfortable." And so, we began preparing for a new chapter in our lives. I didn't know what awaited us, but I believed that as long as David was by my side, every challenge could be overcome. Still, a vague sense of unease lingered in my heart, as if something was silently waiting, ready to change everything in an instant. 3 weeks after moving in with my in-laws, I started to clearly feel the changes in my life. Camille, David's mother, always showed concern and care, but it felt like she was everywhere. She knocked on our door every morning, supposedly to see if I needed laundry done. If I cooked dinner, she would quietly stand next to me, guiding every step, as if I were a clumsy child in the kitchen. I tried to stay calm, telling myself this was just her way of showing affection. But as time went on, the interference became too much. One afternoon, when I returned home from the office, I found Camille tidying up in our bedroom. All my clothes had been moved, and a small box of personal keepsakes lay open on the bed. "Oh, Sophie, I just wanted to help tidy things up," she said, her eyes filled with innocence. "Thank you, but you don't need to do that. I prefer organizing my own things," I said gently, though a deep unease settled in my heart. When I told David about this, he just laughed, saying his mom always loved cleaning and might not realize it made me uncomfortable. "Just talk to her directly, she'll understand," he said, quickly changing the subject. Gradually, I felt my personal space shrinking. Everything I did felt monitored. If I came home late, Camille would ask where I went, who I met, and when I'd be back. If I bought something new, she would subtly imply that it was an unnecessary expense. She even suggested I hand over my entire monthly salary to David to manage the family finances better. Things got more serious when David started mentioning the need to repair the house. One evening, as the whole family sat around the dinner table, he spoke up. "This house is old and needs a lot of repairs. The roof leaks and the electrical system is outdated. I think we should renovate a bit, not just for safety, but also to increase the house's value." Brian, David's father, nodded in agreement. That's right, but our financial situation isn't great at the moment. A little help would go a long way. I was surprised by how they all looked at me, as if I were the only solution to their problem. David continued. Sophie, can you help? You know it's just temporary. Once things get better, we'll pay you back. Though I felt hesitant, I still agreed to help. I withdrew money from my personal savings and covered part of the repair costs. But the expenses kept coming, from fixing the roof to replacing plumbing. Camille didn't hesitate to call contractors without consulting me first, only telling me to cover the bill when the invoices arrived. One afternoon, while sorting through documents in the shared office drawer, I accidentally found a bank statement. The bold words, "property mortgage," made my heart skip a beat. The house had been mortgaged, and the debt amounted to $250,000. Moreover, the bank had notified that the repayment deadline was approaching. My heart pounded and countless questions flooded my mind. Why had no one told me about this? Why were all the repair costs falling on me when they clearly knew the financial situation of the house? When I confronted David, he sighed, avoiding my gaze. I didn't want you to worry. My parents are struggling, and I thought, if we helped, everything would eventually be okay. But this debt is too big, David. We can't handle it on our own. He remained silent, then suddenly said, or maybe you could ask your dad? He's in a good financial position. It's just temporary. I promise we'll pay him back. I was stunned, not expecting him to suggest that. I knew my father was always willing to help, but this wasn't just about money. It was about the truth of how I had been deceived, how my in-laws had exploited my kindness. In the end, wanting to save the situation, I still called my dad. He agreed to help, but with the condition that everything needed to be documented clearly. I didn't object, as it was reasonable. When the money was transferred, Camille and Brian seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, continuously thanking me. But David became distant, as if he was irritated by my father's cautiousness. The real turning point came not long after. One early morning, as I was getting ready for work, my phone rang. It was a doctor from the hospital, their voice filled with regret. Sophie, your father has had an incident. We're very sorry. The world collapsed beneath my feet. I rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. My father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack, leaving me with a whirlwind of emotions. At the funeral, David and his family appeared very attentive. But amid the condolences, I started to hear strange whispers. A distant relative mentioned seeing David talking to the bank about a loan he needed to erase traces of. My instincts told me something was wrong. I went through the documents my father had kept and discovered that the money he lent to David's family had never been officially recorded. The receipts I thought were fully signed were, in fact, just makeshift copies without legal value. The pieces of the puzzle began to come together. Camille, Brian, and David had secretly conspired, using my trust to wipe out their massive debt. They never intended to repay the money. They had even set up a plan where I would bear all the consequences if the house was foreclosed by the bank. A surge of anger rose within me, but I knew I needed to stay calm. They thought I was just a naive girl, easy to manipulate, but they were wrong. Very wrong. I sat alone in the small room, the light from the desk lamp casting shadows over the piles of documents in front of me. The receipts, contracts, and my father's handwritten notes appeared faintly under the yellow glow. I couldn't believe everything had gone this far, that the family I once considered close could coldly take advantage of me to this extent. I took a deep breath, telling myself to remain calm. The feeling of betrayal crept into every cell, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions take over. If I wanted to reclaim justice, I needed a specific and wise plan. I decided to contact my father's lawyer, Mr. Howard Grayson, who had been with our family for many years. Sophie, I heard about your father. I'm so sorry, he said over the phone, his voice filled with sincerity. Thank you, Uncle Howard, but today I need your help with something even more important, I said, keeping my emotions in check. I need you to review all the documents related to the money my father lent to David's family. I feel like something isn't right. The next day, I met Howard at his office. He had already prepared a thick file. Sophie, you were right. The documents your father signed were only temporary copies. But fortunately, he sent me the official, notarized originals. I looked at the papers Howard handed me, and a sense of relief washed over me. All the loans, the amounts, and the repayment timelines were clearly documented, undeniable. I want to negotiate with them, but I need everything to be legal and transparent, I said, my eyes filled with determination. Howard nodded. I'll arrange a meeting. Prepare yourself. A few days later, the negotiation took place at the lawyer's office. David, Camille, and Brian showed up with confident faces, perhaps thinking I would be as easily led as before. But today, things would be different. Sophie, what's this all about? Why do you need all of us here? David started, his voice tinged with irritation. I think we need to clear up the matter of the money my father lent you, I responded, my voice calm but sharp. Camille shrugged, trying to keep a natural demeanor. Oh, dear Sophie, we're family. There's no need to make such a big deal out of this. Yes, family, I emphasized. Then why did the family deliberately hide the mortgage debt from me? Why did you use the money without intending to repay it? David immediately stood up. What are you talking about? Isn't everything clear already? We don't owe you anything. I placed the file on the table, opening it in front of them. These are the original, notarized documents. Every loan, every receipt, every transaction is clearly recorded. If you don't want to resolve this peacefully, I will have to take legal action. Camille's expression shifted from surprise to panic. Brian sat silently, his hands trembling slightly. Only David maintained a tough exterior. Are you threatening me, Sophie? You don't have any evidence. I smiled, but there was no joy in my eyes. On the contrary, I have enough evidence to file a lawsuit, and if this goes to court, not only will the $250,000 debt need to be paid immediately, but this house will also be seized. I don't think you want that to happen, do you? The atmosphere in the room grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. Howard sat next to me, saying nothing but his gaze full of support. Finally, Camille broke down in tears. Sophie, please. We have nothing left. If we lose this house, we won't know where to go. That was your choice, I replied, my voice unwavering. I won't let myself be taken advantage of anymore. After a long argument, they were forced to agree to transfer the house ownership to me to clear the debt. All legal procedures were completed quickly. Every signature placed on the documents, every seal stamped, felt like the final nails sealing the door to my painful past. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch, watching David and his parents pack their belongings into the old truck. Camille couldn't stop crying, and Brian kept his head down, saying nothing. David approached, his eyes, which once made my heart flutter, now empty and hollow. Sophie, I know I was wrong, but could you give me another chance? I looked at him, a fleeting sense of pity passing through but quickly fading. David, I've given you many chances, but you lost them all on your own. We're done. I hope you find your own path, but not here, and not with me. He stood there, his shoulders slumped, then quietly turned away. As the truck drove off, I felt a fresh breeze blow into the house, bringing with it the tranquility I had long sought. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I redecorated the house, every wall, every corner reflecting my personal touch. My life was no longer bound by lies and shady schemes. Every morning, I would look out into the garden, seeing flowers bloom under the morning sunlight. I felt free, like my life was a blank page, pristine and full of potential. And I knew that no matter what happened in the future, I would never let anyone else make decisions for me again. I had reclaimed my life, my freedom, and my right to decide my own future. And that was my greatest victory. Sophie's story is a testament to the strength of determination and courage in protecting one's rights. From a gentle and vulnerable woman, Sophie stood up for justice and regained control of her life. She not only overcame the grief of losing a loved one, but also faced betrayal from those she once loved and trusted. Through this story, Sophie delivers a powerful message that, no matter how harsh life can be, everyone deserves happiness and freedom in their own home. What do you think of Sophie's story and her courageous journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel to catch more meaningful and insightful stories about family life.